For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to Books Corner on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. This evening, we are looking at a very, very Indian narrative in the form of this book, Braving a Viral Storm by Aashish Chandorkar, who is here with me, one of the authors along with Suraj Sudhir, who is based in the US. Aashish, welcome.
Thank you so much, Surya, for having me.
Ashish is actually a counselor at the India's permanent mission at the WTO in Geneva, and from that perch, he's had a kind of a grandstand view of how the Indian fight against the pandemic played out, and he was in a position to develop the story from that perch. It gives him a broad view of the India story, and there's also addressed some of the issues that came up in the process of taking on the challenge. So Ashish, I understand this book is selling well.
Yes, it's just released, but seems to be doing well.
So let's begin at the very beginning. Yeah. How did you happen on this story? Was it something that people told you? Was it something that interested you?
So Suraj and I, both my co-author, I mean, we were both tracking the whole events of the pandemic time, how the pandemic affected the economy, the country, socially. We also tracked the progress into the vaccination part, so the problem and the solution part. If you remember when the vaccination started, in fact on January 16th we will celebrate the second anniversary of the vaccination process starting.
Yeah.
So at that time there was a lot of skepticism in 2021 on what can we achieve, or how will the vaccination solve the pandemic problem at all. So we've been tracking this through that period, and we saw the shift of the narrative, shift of how the vaccination pace picked up, and how that's so far held well for the country. So once things stabilized, we thought that okay, we have done a lot of data collection, research, investigation. Why should we not turn this into like a more broad, book effort? And that's how the genesis. So we had a thought, but we waited for the pandemic to stabilize before we started writing the book.
So was it also triggered by perhaps some of the skepticism voiced internationally over India's vaccine effort, and also the kind of negative publicity, especially in the second wave?
Yes, indeed. If you see, the COVID really did not have a playbook.
Yeah.
Every country got hit in its own ways. In fact, if you go back to the start of the pandemic, and if you see the stories from Europe which emerged in the early parts in March 2020 period, even those stories were very sad and very difficult tragic stories, very tragic stories.
Yeah.
There were countries where doctors had to make a call around giving oxygen to a young person versus an old person because there was not enough oxygen, and they had to really take a call who to save. Unfortunately, our tragedy got magnified many-fold. The commentary was significantly negative. It was also our misfortune, the Delta variant, which was a much harsher variant, hit us. It could have hit any country.
Yeah.
But it chose to hit us for whatever reason. So even in the US, if you see, like, there were reports around how bodies used to be stacked in the containers, and especially in New York state. So there were tragedies all over the world. So, but our commentary obviously was very, very negative. Of course, we were also very badly hit. There's no doubt. I mean, our infrastructure, infrastructure is not created the day pandemic hits. I mean, it's in decades of effort basically.
Yeah,
right? So we were where we were in terms of that, and even then we had differences across states and across cities. So we were not a very uniform kind of a response was possible to pandemic. So yes, but when you recognize or when you talk about the problems, we also believe that it's good to talk about how you solve the problems, what the solutions are, what the effort the system puts in, and in that sense, when the things started getting better, we didn't see that much of reverse commentary happening, right? So when vaccines, when there was skepticism, there was a lot of skepticism, but when things were stable, there wasn't a lot of praise, or there was not a lot of acknowledgement of the effort which our political community, scientific community, bureaucracy, they're all put in together.
Good news doesn't make news.
Exactly. So we thought, okay, why not? Let's change that. Let's make it our effort to change that narrative, and that's how we kind of. So yeah, you're right to say that that was a prime trigger for the book.
Now, when you look at how this challenge was met, you know, I was going through the book. You talk about the all of government effort.
Yeah.
Could you give us a kind of sense as to how this actually worked out? Who was driving it?
Sure. So see, we had this like a coordination committee kind of a setup right from March 2020. There was inter-ministerial, inter-agency type setup which we have had through the pandemic. I mean, literally from the first month of the pandemic. So in that, and I think one thing which is very well understood is in our system is that the government is fairly siloed. I mean, each department, each ministry does its own thing, right? And it's partly by design also that you know how you function autonomously. But when a crisis hits, then you have to come together. And by the way, it's not just the central government; it is also the states. Because each state has its own way of governing and its own apparatus. So there was always this. The coordination effort started right from March 2020. So it's not just about the vaccination; it was also about the COVID effort at large. But specifically on vaccination, there was the National Empowered Group on Vaccination called NEGVAC, which was also set up very early in the process. It had fairly senior officials from various agencies, various bodies, and as the name suggested, it was an empowered group, so it could take decisions on how some of the vaccine research or trial process should evolve, or what were the bottlenecks to resolve. Who can they approach to resolve those bottlenecks? So I think that effort was really important in our context because left to a ministry, and this was not a problem to be solved by a ministry because like a real example. So let's say you needed inputs from US for making a vaccine. Now if the US exports were closed, or let's say logistically it was not possible to get, now how do you solve that problem? Who requests to the US government that they should allow exports of some commodities that we need, because our vaccine is a complex. It's not like a single product. Like there are some 250 odd ingredients which go in a vaccine. So small things which are chemicals which have to come from some other place. How do you get them here if the country has banned them, or if there's a logistical issue in terms of shipping industry being not working to its capacity. So that whole of government effort was anyway needed, and one good thing was that we recognized this very early on, that you will need for internal like to maintain how the COVID response internally was. You had the Home Ministry involved. Health, of course, was always there. Then the Foreign Ministry got involved for the whole discussions from outside.
From what you're telling me, one gets the impression that there was an apprehension early on that this could be catastrophic, even devastating.
In fact, yes, and if you see, the lockdown decision was driven by that. Right? I think what our view was that if you go back to 2020, forget vaccines. I mean, in Feb 2020, we did not even have masks and PPE kits. Even that were supposed to be imported. And there was a very early realization that at India's scale, you cannot rely on simply getting things from outside. You will have to have a national response, because it's not about intent, or it's not about that some other country would not want to supply you something. The problem was our scale is so huge that the 140 crore people, if you needed masks which change 3 times a day, 4 times a day, I mean, how do you get like 500 crore masks for a daily use? I mean, theoretically, of course, it may be could have been a smaller number, but that scale could not. I mean, who will produce that many masks for your requirements, right? So I think that realization was very early on, and which is why if you see, this whole Atmanirbhar theme has played out through the pandemic response. In fact, PM talked about it in May 2020 when the country came out of the lockdown. But lockdown was used to delay the impact of the first wave, where we created national capacities on textiles, on PPE kits, on masks at that time, on some smaller stuff like testing kits. If you remember, in the first couple of weeks, only NIV Pune was the only agency testing. So how would you send samples collected in a village to an airport, from there come to Pune? Pune airport had its own bottlenecks. You can't then, it's a small airport. How do you get to NIV? So you had to create national testing capacity, accredited labs, standards. So yeah, that thought was very much there, and it helped the vaccine process as well, because that came later.
Now, when the developed world had kind of taken a monopoly on the vaccines. So what was the reaction here? Did they apprehend something of this kind?
Yes, it was very clear that national priorities will remain in focus for the vaccination effort.
All over the world.
All over the world, right? And the vaccine nationalism was very, very, very real in the sense how other countries approached it. Different countries had different approaches, and let me just summarize like a few, 3-4 examples for you. So the US approach was that, okay, let us throw money at the problem. So they had this thing called Operation Warp Speed, where they, I think numbers are not very clear, but there are news reports which indicate that 8 to 9 billion was the range, in billion, not million, 8 to 9 billion was the range in which US spent. Now, like what really came out of it, if you really see. So of course Pfizer had a vaccine. There was a Moderna vaccine. There's a Johnson Janssen one dose vaccine which was there. The J&J vaccine was not used much. Moderna had its own limitations in terms of the scaling up because it was a smaller company. Pfizer, yes, but they also had a tie-up with BioNTech of Germany. So these vaccines actually already existed in some way. They kind of scaled them up to the national and the global use. But what about the other few billions which got given to other companies? Like
nothing.
We don't know. Nothing came out of it, right? So if that approach, India was not in a position to take, both in terms of the way the system and the perceptions work in India. Like government cannot just call 10 companies and say, you take this money and go away, right? And no one cares what the accountability is. So that wouldn't have worked very well in India. Also, you can't throw away money. I mean, how much money do you throw away? Like, what is the right number? So again, it was because US has the resources, so they just decided to kind of go ahead with it. EU approach was different. EU, of course, has been funding something like a project on vaccine research since 2014. So they have had some let's say, some steps had already been taken to look at viral research and vaccination efforts. So they decided to scale that effort and place advance orders, basically. But again, the challenge with vaccines is that just because there are orders doesn't mean your supply line will scale up. Because supply lines need specific type. Like for example, in the Bharat Biotech's case, you needed a BSL-3 laboratory. So you cannot. So this is not like producing fast-moving consumer goods where you just buy a machine and start producing in 3 weeks' time. A BSL-3 safety lab will take a few months to kind of
get going,
put it up, test it out, ensure that it's fully kind of there are no leaks happening and all of that. So our approach had to be driven not by money, but by process facilitation, which is to say that how can the government be a market maker? How can it be a facilitator? How can it be a catalyst in the vaccine development process? And how can it resolve bottlenecks? Because vaccine development is a very, very, very complex, very expensive, multiple stages of development, trials. Each trial can fail. I mean, you can have a very good early response or theoretical response in the lab, but it may not even cross phase 1 of the trials.
So today we have an IPR in the vaccine?
We have multiple IPRs. We have, of course, the Bharat Biotech Covaxin is one IPR. We have a DNA-based vaccine with Zydus Cadila. There's also an mRNA vaccine which Genova in Pune tried to make, and I think they did reach some point. So even if they did not really use it in the COVID context, I think the technology is well understood now in India, even for mRNA. There are other, like there's a nasal vaccine with Bharat Biotech, which is again, we also had a Corbevax which came from US, which is an open source kind of a idea. So yes, there's a lot of intellectual property, and that was the other heartening thing, that I think we have got IP across all vaccine technologies available in India today.
Does this serve as a kind of a template, for maybe future mass, infections, pandemics?
We really hope so, and we've said this in the book, that not just for a pandemic-like situation, which is of course now a playbook is there, that you can what happened, but what has also caught our attention, and we mentioned that in the book, is on 2 other things. One is that there's some institutionalization of response happening. For example, you might have seen this National Institute of One Health, which got the foundation of that was laid in Nagpur in December. So the concept of One Health is that zoonotics is an area which will increasingly cause of concern for the human race. So humans, animals, plant life and climate change, how do they interact together to create new kind of diseases which jump from plants or animals to humans. So this National Institute of One Health will essentially address that. We've also spoken about creating additional national institutes of virology, like just not depending on the Pune Institute, but just have 4 more of them. So one change which can potentially come is on that field, which is that you institutionalize more research and development ahead of some of these problems coming up. Even this pandemic, people have talked about pandemics for so long. It's just that until it's not coming, there's skepticism. But when it comes, there's panic. So it's better to be prepared and spend some resources on kind of preparing for the next one rather than reacting when it comes and catching you unaware. The second issue or the second benefit of this process could be that for non-healthcare domain also, this whole of government approach in which are the areas in which it can work very well, that we think could be another inspirational kind of, this could serve as an inspirational story for that.
When we look at, I was reading something in the paper today, that there's a committee of medical experts who have said that we need to now scale down the COVID, focus on COVID and look at the other diseases that really are all over the country and have yet to be addressed. And perhaps because of the pandemic, we lost sight of many of them. Has the time come?
I mean, I'm not a medical expert and we didn't approach the book from a medical technology, but yes, if you see the reports in other countries, for example, I mean, if you were to look at, for example, in the West, there's a lot of concern that a lot of early cancer diagnosis has not happened because the patients never went and took those tests. In India, of course, we don't probably do as much we should be, but we are kind of a little behind on the cancer curve in terms of early diagnosis. But yes, these kind of issues are important. So COVID, when it came, there was a lot of anxiety and fear and people did not want to step out and perhaps missed some of their early diagnosis or some of their, let's say, routine checkups, which could have led to more knowledge about, people developing certain conditions. So it would appear that yes, that response or that effort, including the effects of long COVID, need to be studied better.
Aashish, last question. What are the broad takeaways? You have gone through this book, you've spoken to people, you've researched a lot into our health system and all. What are the broad takeaways now?
So there are a few areas which we believe that will have a positive impact on through the learnings of this process. One is that the fact that we pulled this off, which is largely a national response. I mean, of course, Covishield IP was elsewhere and we got it and we still scaled the manufacturing of it in India. But that aside, I mean, again, India played a big role in that process. So the national capacity has delivered. So there should be more confidence in the system overall that we need not be only we need not only be the receiving end of intellectual property. We can do more research and development. The country can productize things very fast. I mean, our pharma industry, you see, they've been extremely good at creating the generic medicines and creating a scale volume of medicine. R&D perhaps could have been faster than what it has been. So I think this could really change that perception within the industry. I mean, as a self-belief that this can be done. So that is, I think, one area of potential change that we may observe. The second area is that the government response around healthcare, on the healthcare infrastructure. You already saw some of the changes happening in the budgets in the COVID time budgets or the post-COVID budgets, where much more has been committed in terms of creating national infrastructure, and that is not just by the means of infrastructure of hospital networks, but even the larger things like the NIVs and the National Institute of One Health, which we talked about. So across the continuum, that the basic infrastructure, how do you get a hospital in every district? How do you get specialty hospitals in every district? From there on to have more of these forward-looking research and study centers. I think that is another thread of response which really we should perhaps see more progress on in the years to come. And the final area would be that the learnings from the technology side of it. So the whole COVID platform, the way it was used, how we digitally differentiated ourselves in our response relative to other countries. That is another very key learning, because these platforms can be replicated for a lot of things. Like COVID need not be just limited to the COVID response. National vaccination programs, where again we've had some success since the Mission Indradhanush launched in 2015-16 time frame. In fact, the electronic vaccine information network, which was used for Mission Indradhanush, was at least repurposed as COVID in some ways. So that integration has can really do wonders going forward, because COVID took the whole story to a different level.
Yeah.
And underpinning all this is also the fact that we can also help, like we, in terms of vaccine exports, we help other countries. In terms of technology platform, perhaps we can help other countries. Right? So these are some of the areas of opportunity, I would say, going forward, and it will need the similar kind of seriousness and similar kind of, let's say, focus which we saw during the pandemic. To then take each of these verticals and then run with it towards the next set of maturity.
So for all of you out there braving a viral surge, this is something that you must read. It gives you the India perspective, the India narrative. Aashish, congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Surya, for having me.
Pleasure talking to you. That's all we have for you today on Books Corner. Do follow us on social media and Instagram and Twitter. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Good night.